Nice to see everybody. Um, an early Shabbat Shalom. I like how you said that. This is Parshat Vayishlach, which um, when I signed up to teach today, it was just based on calendar and availability. And then I got really happy because um, I love this Parsha. Although, as I say that, I hear my teachers saying, like, you can't have a favorite Parsha. The Torah is the Torah. They're all our favorites. But in disappointing my teachers, I will have to say this is one of my favorites. Um, it's so it's both in some ways focused on a very short narrative, but yet so rich because there are so many scenes in Vayishlach, and we're going to take a look at one small moment and some of the commentary about that moment. But first, two global pieces. What I love about Torah, and one of the reasons, what I think is part of the secret sauce of Torah, like one of the reasons why it's engaged us for thousands of years, is that the Torah is written in a way that draws you in because one, things don't always turn out the way you think they might or you think they should. Um, and there's often a lot of really important facts or details or ideas or character motivations that aren't explicitly stated. And the Torah brings you in as a participant in the conversation to try to figure out, hey, what's going on here? And we see both of these things in the story we're going to look at this week, which is in part why it's so rich. So a little context, but if you're a regular here, or you're reading Parshat Shavua or a regular synagogue goer, this will be familiar to you, right? We're in the cycle of Jacob stories. Jacob is a twin. Jacob and his brother Esau, very different, lots of sibling rivalry. Um, there's a competition, maybe facilitated by mom and dad, between the two of them for the birthright, which Jacob ends up with, even though he's younger, which in fear of his life and his angry brother makes him flee for several weeks of Parshat Shavua, where he ends up building while he flees, he's away, he grows a family, he acquires wealth, and at the end of last week, beginning of this week, he decides it's time to come back home. And part of his coming back home, Vayishlach, he sends out messengers to his brother, from whom he's estranged, fled in fear for his life. And as the Torah would, I think, would have it, the two of them have not been in contact with one another. And as he returns, there's a whole pageantry. I was thinking as I read the parsha this week, like what the movie would look like, especially with all the effects technology we have today, about the planes that they're on, where the brothers reunite. And there's a rich description of how Jacob lays out his camp so that when his brother comes to meet him, we'll see his flocks and his family and his children, and he offers gifts, and they reunite and they hug. And there's this scene where they come back together, and this comes back to one of my opening points, where there's a beautiful moment where two brothers who have spent a lifetime apart hug and reunite. And there's a deep, deep, deep piece of me as a person, and even deeper, as a dad, where I want this moment to last. The two brothers who've been estranged put their differences aside, they hug, and I want that to be the end, and for them to live side by side for the rest of their days, in peace and harmony, putting the past aside. But it's not so clear that that's what the case is, and that's what we're going to look at. I'm going to share some slides in a second to bring up the verses in question. But before I do that, I just put in the text the link to the Google Doc that has these slides. I know some of you like to see them on your own, and my apologies for one brief.
Rabbi,
Yes.
at the moment, we don't have capabilities to see
Yes.
it.
That was I'm gonna change. I'm
Wonderful.
changing that setting. Apologies
Thank
for not
you.
doing it before. Yeah, that was fast. You figured that out. I knew
I
that
think
was.
that's my role.
Yes, that is your role. Yes, yes, yes. All right. I see people not only with access, but now coming into the document. So thank you I'm from the 20th century. So while I'm gaining I feel pretty at home. I'm definitely a visitor here in the 21st century, even though we use this all the time. All right. I'm going to share my screen and we'll go to the text and we'll go on a little journey at this moment. Here we go. Sharing the screen, starting the slideshow. All right. Nope. Sorry, I went ahead too far. All right. So the brothers have reunited. They've hugged. They've said some words to each other. At Genesis 33:12 starts the closing of this moment. Esau says to his brother Jacob, "Let's start on our journey, and I will proceed at your pace." It's a loving moment. Asa, right? I note in the language he says, "Let's start on our journey. We're going to move on together in this." And I'm who Aesop came with like an honor guard, and he has a group that's with him. He's not encumbered by the same number of people and flocks and things, and he volunteers to start this journey with his brother after their reunion and slow down his pace to match that of Jacob and his tribe. Um, Echoes of what I said before that I wish this is how it would continue. Here's how Jacob responds. Jacob said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are frail and that the flocks and herds which are nursing and are a care to me. If they are driven hard a single day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord go on ahead of his servant, while I will travel slowly at the pace of the cattle before me and at the pace of the children until I come, my Lord, and see here." Genesis, right? 33, 13, and 14, right after that. Jacob declines his brother's offer to travel together. He has a reason, which seems reasonable. He has flocks, he has children, he has people to care for. He doesn't. They're going to move really slow. He wants to turn his attention to them. And he says, "You don't need to travel slow. You don't need to travel with us. Let us travel at our own pace. You go ahead home, my brother, and I will meet you there when I come to your place in Seir." Not the same sense of togetherness that we saw in Asaph's statement, but potentially reasonable, right? He's got his burden of what he's carrying with him and wants to travel his own pace and maybe not have to attend to his brother and all that comes with that as they go. But alas, this isn't exactly how it ends. Because what do we see next? Jacob said, sorry, I have all of your beautiful faces over the words on my screen now. So Esau starts back on his way to Seir. Jacob journeyed on to Sukkot, and he built a house for himself and made stalls for his castle, etc., etc. Jacob, who just in the verse before said, "Go on ahead, my brother, I'll meet you at Seir when I get there." Esau says, "All right," starts his way back. Jacob goes and ends up in Sukkot, a different town, not Seir, not even close to the same place. He builds a house and he settles down. And here the story ends, or maybe pauses. The reunion happened. The two brothers connect. Esau is ready to journey together. Jacob stalls a little bit, but then on the way stops elsewhere and doesn't make it there. It's a shocking moment for me every year when I read this. I want the brothers to reunite and be together. I'm struck by the fact that Jacob says he's going to meet his brother in Seir and stops elsewhere. And there's so little explanation for this. And that's what we're going to dig into a little bit today. The 13th century commentator Chizkuni provides one of the explanations for this. He says, well, here's what Jacob meant when he said, "I'm going to meet you in Seir." Jacob meant that Once he settles his wives and his family's children and makes suitable arrangements for his flocks and his herds, he'll visit his brother in his brother's homeland Seir. And that's when they'll celebrate their reunion with joy. And so this is a way to say, well, Jacob stopped in Sukkot, but that doesn't mean he wasn't authentic in his promise. Well, you could read his promise to say, you go ahead and I'll get there, meaning I'm just going to move slower. So, you're traveling by jet and I'm on a bicycle. So you fly ahead and I'll arrive soon and I'm going to go straight there because I'm just moving slower. What Chizkuni says is, no, Yaakov meant to go. Just what did he need to do? It wasn't just that he moved slower. He had to move. He had to settle his flocks. He had to build a home for them. He had to get everybody really settled, move in, establish his home in the land of Israel. And once he took care of building a house and getting his fields and crops and all that together, then at some later date, he would have the real reunion with his brother. So Chizkuni tries to, his solution to Jacob's strange behavior is to say, well, we read Jacob's promise to come too soon. He meant to come. It's just supposed to happen later. Do you, a question for all, I guess, for all of us as we go through these commentaries is this one compelling? Do you think this was Jacob's motivation? Does this make what Jacob's decision not to connect with his brother okay? I leave those questions open for you and we'll see. Not following in Chizkuni's footsteps, because this midrash from Breshit Rabbah is much earlier than Chizkuni. But Rabbi Abahu is quoted in the Mishnah in the midrash saying, "We reviewed the entire Bible and did not find that Jacob ever went to Esau at Mount Seir." I love it. First of all, that's still a teacher, but a former school teacher, like I think about which of my students were. I love the students that were Rabbi Abahu. You said in class, Rabbi Goldberg, that Jacob just delayed the promise. We read that Chizkuni. He went later. Okay. I read forward. I read not just the rest of Breshit, but I checked the entire Bible. And here's what I found. Jacob never goes to Seir. So Chizkuni's trying to get Jacob off the hook by saying, all right, we read, it sounds like he meant I'll be there in a week. And he went, months or years later. But the Torah never says that he made it. He never made it. I read every verse in the whole Bible. Jacob never goes. What do we do with that? I love this question in this midrash from Rabbi Abahu, noting that if you want to try to be generous, like Chizkuni was, about how you interpret Jacob's promise, you still have to find the moment where they reunite. And Jacob never makes it to Seir. So does he, maybe he's being disingenuous with his brother because he never actually goes. Rashi goes one step, I think, maybe further than Rabbi Abahu. He brings the following comment. He says, Jacob mentioned a longer journey, but he really intended only to go as far as Sukkot. And this he gets from the Talmud. We're going to peek at this Talmud in a second. But Rashi says, what's Jacob thinking? If he means to do me harm, let him wait to do so until, I reach his house in Seir. And then Jacob decides not to go to Seir. What does that mean? The Rashi needs a little Rashi. Think about it this way. You're traveling on a train with somebody and you feel like, you're caught up in a con. The person's sitting next to you on the train is being a little conniving. They want to con you and you're feeling suspicious of them. And as part of the conversation, they say, where are you getting off? And you say, oh, well, I'm riding all the way to New York City, but you really are getting off at Newark, the station before. And why do you do that? Well, you get to Newark and you start to get off the train and your buddy's trying to con you, says, wait, I thought you were going all the way to Newark. You say, well, no, I lied. I thought you were going all the way to New York. You say, no, I lied. I was getting off here. What's my motivation for lying? If you think I'm going to New York, you have all the way till the end of the trip to really, put your con in place and dupe me of whatever, or steal whatever you're trying to do from me, or do whatever harm you're trying to do. But I got off the train before you can do that because I misled you about where we were going. That's Rashi's frame that he draws from this passage in the Gemara about what Jacob was doing. So what does that mean about Jacob's motivation? Jacob doesn't believe Esau really wants to travel with him together. He doesn't believe in the authenticity of their reunion. He's suspicious that there's a trap being laid for him, and somewhere along the way, his brother's going to get him. The revenge for past deeds is coming. The forgiveness that he came in their hug and embrace was fake. Jacob is still suspicious. So he tells his brother, you go on ahead and I'll meet you at your house, thinking that if his brother's going to get him, where's the ambush going to be? Near Seir. And he gets off the train at Sukkot to avoid the harm that might be done to him. That's Rashi's take. So whereas Chizkuni tried to say, no, Jacob wasn't being dishonest, Rashi's saying, no, he was definitely being dishonest. And this dishonesty came from self-protection because he didn't believe his brother that the reunion was authentic. And so much so does this sort of explanation stick. Here's what comes next in the Talmud about it. I find this to be a tough text from the Talmud. Those of you who are on the Daf Yomi journey, Avodah Zarah, when we get there, is a tough part of the Talmud. It's about ostensibly about Jews dealing with idol worship and practices that are outside of the Jewish religion, but talks a lot about relationship between the Jewish community in rabbinic times and their neighbors, and Rabbi's advice about that. And it's at times difficult to read. And not that I want this to be about Torah and not current events or contemporary issues, but I know worldwide, because of what's going on in the world, Jews are asking questions about how secure we are in the places in which we live in ways that we haven't in decades. And it makes this text echo a little different. But the Talmud says, based on this story in the Torah, if a Gentile asks a person where you're going, the Jew should always claim that he's traveling to a place beyond his actual destination, just like Jacob, our father, did to the wicked Esau, as it says, until I come to my Lord, in Seir. Here the Talmud saying, it's not just Jacob lied, right? They explain Jacob lied, he was trying to save himself. The Talmud takes that story and says, always when you're traveling, if a fellow traveler who's not from your clan asks you where you're going, you should always lie. This is like the advice, the first time you go take the bus on your own, you get, it's probably all digital now, but you get your coins from your parents. They say, take the bus, but if anyone asks you where you're going, tell them you're going to the last stop. So that if they want to do you harm, they'll wait till the end. And when you get off earlier, you'll be safe. The Talmud takes what Jacob did, not just as an event that he did in his own context, but makes it the standard advice about what we should do when we're traveling. Don't trust your fellow travelers. Tell them, and there's the valence here also that the ones outside of our people, be dishonest about what your destination is because you want to save yourself from your wicked neighbors. Right, so this interpretation takes a definitive view of our story in this week's Parsha, that Esau was wicked. And if Esau is wicked, the first verse that we looked at that said, he said, let's go on our journey together, right? The rabbis read in this text says that, right, Esau was wicked, Esau was wicked, not genuine. And being disingenuous, we can't take him seriously, and so we have to treat him this way. It's a tough read of Esau and a tough conclusion, I think, about the state of things and relations between Jews and their neighbors. Want to go back at this point to the rest of the midrash that we touched on earlier. Rabbi Abahu said, right, I read the whole Bible and Esau never went to Seir, and the rabbis weren't comfortable with that. And the midrash that follows in Breshit Rabbah and shows up in a number of other places, they asked the question, is it possible that Jacob, who was truthful, nevertheless deceived Esau? They're saying all right, maybe Esau is wicked. He might be disingenuous, but how could Jacob, our patriarch, our forefather, how could Jacob be deceitful? Isn't he truthful? Don't we want to hold him up as the model of how we're supposed to behave? How could it be that Jacob never went to Seir. He must have gone. When did that happen? And the Midrash says in response, well, he did go. When was it that he went? In the future, and not like the future of his life, in the distant future. He finds a verse in the book of Ovadia, which happens to be the Haftorah this week too. So you're getting Parshat HaShavua this week and a glimpse at the Haftorah. There's a verse there that says the saviors will ascend Mount Zion to judge the mountain of Esau. There's some day where the saviors of the Jewish people that will ascend Mount Zion and judge the mountain of Esau, and that's this time where Jacob and Esau will be reunited. So it's a weird verse to say that. It does talk about the ascenders of Mount Zion, right? The Mount Zion where the temple is, right? God's holy mountain in Jerusalem. They'll ascend there, and it also mentions the mountain of Esau, which is the ridges across the Jordan Valley, and says that's when they're going to meet. But notice the relationship. One group's going to judge the other. It doesn't sound like the spirit of the reunion of two brothers who have put their past aside. It's a weird choice in the verse, and it's much spicier than that if you actually look up this verse in context, which I'm glad I did. Well, I'm sort of glad I did, but then not really when you see what it says. This one goes deeper into the page. Give me a moment. I'm just trying to move. There we go. Just trying to move you guys again so I can see the words on my screen. Oh, sorry. Here's what the prophet Ovadia says about one day what's going to happen out there. The house of Jacob shall be fire, and the house of Joseph flame, and the house of Esau shall be straw. They shall burn it and devour it, and no survivors shall be left of the house of Esau, for God has spoken. For the liberators shall march on the Mount of Zion to wreak judgment on the Mount of Esau, and dominion shall be God's. The verse, right? The last verse here is the one we saw before, translated a little differently by a different translator. But if you look at what Ovadia is saying in context, what's the reunion? The reunion between brothers? It's not a reunion. It's not Jacob accepting Esau's forgiveness. It's not that coming together, but it's this final. I guess it goes back to the time where these were rival brothers, and what's going to happen? It's not just that Jacob is stealing the birthright from Esau. Jacob is the fire, and Esau is the straw. And Jacob's going to burn the house of Esau to the ground. Not just because he wants to do it, because God wants that to be the way. A tough message from the prophet, and a way in which in the prophets, Esau becomes a stand-in for foreign empires that are our rivals that we have to do away with. Later in rabbinic literature, Esau becomes the stand-in for Rome, who was the outside enemy of the day for the rabbis for much of the rabbinic period. This sort of vision of Esau movement that so evil needs to be destroyed. The wicked Esau is so evil needs to be destroyed and burned to the ground is a theme we see in this week's Haftorah. Raises some troubling questions about this story and this interpretation, at least for me, that's here, which is why I don't want to end on it. The Malbim, who's a 19th century commentator, has a different take. One that the Malbim often summarizes a lot of the commentary that came before because he's 19th century and often adds his own voice. And I like this one. While there's no evidence in it of the Torah, right? The rabbi who went and read all the verses of the Torah won't see this exactly, but it's a good midrash because it just might fit between the seams of the Torah. The Malbim says Jacob promised to go to Seir, but here's what happened before he could do that. Esau returned to Seir to live with his father, and when Jacob went to see his father, he found Esau there. So what happened? Esau went back to his house in Seir. Jacob went to build his household and get settled. And before Jacob could go visit his brother, he went to visit his dad. And when he got to his dad's house, he found out his brother had moved back in. maybe after whatever family, right? Jacob returned to the land of Israel, and Esau made up with Jacob. And then Esau also made up with Isaac, and the family reunited so much so that Esau could move back home. And Esau stayed with his father until his father died. And Jacob and Esau had a reunion, just not in Seir. That was what became Esau's homeland, but it was back in their father's household. And they continued to see each other there when Jacob visited until Isaac died. Where's the evidence for that in the Bible? Still in this week's Parsha, a little later, where we learn of the death of Isaac. Very briefly, Isaac was 180 years old when he breathed his last and died. He was gathered to his kin in ripe old age, and he was buried by his sons, Esau and Jacob. So the Torah does tell us, after Isaac's last moments on earth, for his funeral, the two brothers, Jacob and Esau, come back together to bury their father. Was this after, as Malbim puts it, they had many years to reunite and visit and spend together in their father's household? Was this a reunion that was separated from their last reunion, 2 chapters earlier, but when they hug, but then Esau goes home and Jacob makes a left turn and doesn't make it? Was it a tense reunion? Was there the fire and brimstone that Obadiah called for? And was there that hate and flame between the two of them? Was it a loving, tender moment? Did they talk to each other? Did they not talk to each other? The Torah doesn't say. But this is the one hint that says they did see each other again. They came together for their father's funeral. What was the nature of this moment? Could be colored by which of the interpretations that we saw today strikes your fancy. And this moment also is ripe for us to write our own midrashim to talk about what was this reunion like. It gets a little less fanfare than the first reunion that we looked at today, but this is also part of this week's Parshat Shavua, maybe the capstone to the story, and maybe another opening to bring midrash, to bring our creativity, to fill in the gaps in the story and figure out what was the relationship between Jacob and Esau about, how did it end, and how can we learn from it, use it to inspire us in these days. All right, so I stopped the sharing. I see that as I've been sharing, 62 comments came into the chat. That's awesome. One of the things, while I am from the 20th century, one of the things I love about the 21st century is we found a way to channel like the chatter, while you're studying, to make it productive by having a chat that allows people to have a side conversation that's on topic. And it's always so rich when I review the chat after we're done with our time to see all the things that you guys have said. Just that fact that it's there makes it rich enough on its own. But I'm hoping, Mara, you have maybe flagged some things for us that might be worth addressing or giving voice
Sure.
to.
Sure. So I think a theme of some of the questions is, we look at Jacob in our tradition as, one of our patriarchs, and there's a certain righteousness that comes with that. And we see Esau as not necessarily our direct lineage, but certainly there are lots of reads in which he's sort of an enemy. And in the texts, the people themselves don't necessarily fit that black and white, good and bad.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the character development and sort of how we view that?
Well, I love that theme. And I think this question is more about people than about the Torah. Meaning, when I read the Torah, like I'm with you in this question, the main characters of the Torah, all of them, in one way or another, have flaws. They make bad decisions. They're hurtful to their families. They anger God. They make dubious ethical choices. And we as readers have a choice to make. Are we going to try to justify them and paint a picture that says they're always right? And there must be some way to read this story that makes our forefathers perfect? Or do we embrace their flaws, and embrace the fact that people have flaws and say, what can we learn from the story? What's it about? Um, I find myself in the second camp more than the first. I don't feel the drive to put any of our biblical ancestors on a pedestal. Um, right, we have figures in our tradition that we look to that we want to be proud of, right? But Judaism doesn't have saints, right? When it doesn't, Abraham doesn't become Saint Abraham. He's not meant to be a model of perfection. I think if the point of Torah is in part to have conversations about Torah, the complications that this question points towards is exactly the point, and it's what makes Torah rich, the fact that like you have to struggle with this. What was Jacob doing here and why? What's his motivation and why? And it also means that this year your answer doesn't have to be the same as next year. It means the answer for you, when this is your bar mitzvah parsha, doesn't have to be the same answer for you, when it's your grandchild's bar mitzvah parsha, or somewhere in between. There was a time where I kind of really loved Joseph. We're about to read the Joseph story. Joseph was kind of fun. I think my thinking Joseph was kind of fun was very influenced by the Broadway musical. That's kind of fun.
Same with my husband.
There's great. It's a fun musical, and there's great songs, and it was a big hit, and it was so validating. Look, it's our story on Broadway. And then I started reading more as I kept growing about Joseph in the Torah, and I'm like, I don't like this guy at all. And maybe, now later, and it's time for me to revisit Joseph and say, what's it going to be like this year? Well, how's it going to turn out for me? That's also some of the magic of Torah, in that I see a lot of you are taking a stand in the chat, which is great. Here's what I think is going on with this character, and I love that. But I also love that next year when we read it again, you can take a different stand, and that to me is what makes Torah a living document. So you have the choice. Do you want to find a way to read the story to make our characters shine? You can do that. You can find midrashim to help you do that, and you can make your own. Do you want to embrace their flaws, and call them out, be angry at them for having them? You can do that too, and you can find midrashim that support you as well. And I hope you enjoy you enjoy both, and you do the one that makes sense for you this year.
Thank you.
Sure.
Another theme in the chat, people brought up another story of brothers burying their father. Can you talk a little bit about how the story in this week's parsha differs from how Isaac and Ishmael buried Abraham?
I have to go back. Got to open up a different.
Sorry to throw you on the spot.
No, that's fine. Right, there is a parallel there, right? We have brothers who, through the plot, get separated and end up, with different destinies, who come back to, bury their father. We see that before. What I think I'm struck about in both cases is each of those vignettes are short, right? We saw today it was like 2 verses, and the Torah doesn't give us a whole story about what happened at the burial, what it was like, right? The same terseness here, I think, is the terseness there for Isaac and Ishmael, and that lets us fill in the gap, right? Someone just put in the chat, right? Did these brothers have a relationship between the last time they were in the same room, right? The same of the Torah, right? They're in the same room, and then they go apart. and then they come back together in the same room to bury their father. Um, what happened between them when the Torah is sort of silent? Did they have a relationship? Did their parents know about it? Was it public? Was it private? Was it strained? Was it not? There's the whole world of possible answers for it. I don't have one in particular. I think it's interesting that that's a place in both cases where the Torah doesn't um, fill in any of those gaps, and we're totally left to our imagination. I think the one thing that with my rabbi hat on that um, is important to me about those stories for us today is that uh, it's when a family member dies and there's been strife in the family, um, coming together for the funeral is important, no matter what the history is, no matter how hard that might be. In the worst case scenario of what the relationships between the brothers was, they had to come together to bury their father. I would really think, would hope it could, the reunion could happen before, and sometimes it does. But I'm not so naive to think that people can always bury the hatchet. But I do think the Torah is trying to say the mitzvah, right, the obligation to bury a parent falls on the whole family, and you have to make space for the whole family to be there, no matter what the history, no matter what it looks like. And we see that both with Isaac and Ishmael, and here Jacob and Esav, and that's definitely a theme that's in the Torah.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
We there's a lot of meat there, so thank you. And people in the chat are thanking you for sort of leaning on the ambiguities and the tension of this parsha in particular. We do have a few minutes left. I want to give you the floor, Rabbi. Is there, you mentioned every year you take something different away. I think that will be the case, certainly. Is there something that you want us all to take away from this session and think about as we go into Shabbat?
Yeah, well, that's it. Thank you for that opportunity at the end. And I appreciate all the thoughts from, appearing in the chat from all over the world. First, there's a lot in this parsha, as Steph just said. So, I picked this story, but, you could go deep here, but you could go broad, and there's a lot of other things to dwell on as well. What I'm thinking about on this theme of the Torah is different every year, what I'm thinking a lot about, given what's going on in the world and the way it's touching us, I've been thinking about how my read of the Parsha, my celebrating of our holidays, is colored by the events in the world. How themes that some years are just about, this is the narrative in the Torah this week, now raise questions about, like, how does this story connect to current events and all their complexities. Unfortunately, we're at a time where there's serious strife, right? There's war between Jews and their brothers in the world, where some, I would imagine, wouldn't like that character because of the nature of the strife. Framing it that way might be difficult for people, to say Jews and their brothers. But I think for me, anyways, we're part of humanity and we're all in it together, and it makes it's a hard time. And because of the tension and the complexity of that hard time, I didn't want to make this Parshat of Shavua session with a heterogeneous group from all over the world about current, I didn't want that to be our topic today. But I think for me, anyways, my read of Parshat Shavua is definitely my read of Parshat Shavua. My thinking about, like, what's Hanukkah about for me this year is definitely challenged by what's going on in the world. And I think a lot about what's the way to read this story in light of what's going on in the world, and so that, there are some of the themes of Hanukkah that are often very comfortable for me that aren't going to be comfortable themes this year because of what's going on in the world. And that's a piece about how the Torah and Parshat HaShavua and study, right? The reason why it's a lifelong thing for us is that our texts mean different things at different times. And so, anyways, what I would say, I'm sorry, I'm having it. I hope you're getting the essence of what I'm saying. I'm not sure I'm being totally articulate, but if you find your mind drifting as you study these texts into current events and to think about how they influence each other, that's part of what Torah is about. And I would say to, if your question was, what's the takeaway for this year, I think it's that challenge. Use both the text to help you as a lens to help you understand what's going on, and use what's going on to help you understand the text. And notice how you in your mind, in your heart, and in your soul are responding to all of those things, because we're all finding ways to cope with a really difficult time, and there should be some solace from Torah, and I hope we have it. And my wish for all of us is that all of us on the call and all of us in the world as a whole is that this Shabbat be really full of shalom. I find myself in these days not just saying Shabbat Shalom, but as as the standard greeting. But we need our Shabbat to be full of shalom, and the shalom that we taste on Shabbat to enter back into the world. So it's the world's a better place when shalom is everywhere. So wishing you a Shabbat full of shalom, and a great week next week, and everyone should be well and healthy and safe till we're back together again studying Torah.
Amen. Thank you so much, Rabbi, and wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye.
Same to you. Take care, everybody. Thanks for being here.